Investigating the crime scene. As the two strangers woke up in the dimly lit basement, their eyes immediately fell upon the lifeless body of a man lying in the center of the room. The sight of the bullet hole in his head and the weapon clutched in his hand sent shivers down their spines. Confusion and fear gripped them as they struggled to comprehend the situation they found themselves in. The strangers took a moment to assess their surroundings. The basement was damp and musty, with peeling paint on the walls and a single dim light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The air was heavy with an eerie silence, broken only by the sound of their own breathing. It was clear that they were trapped, their ankles chained to the walls, restricting their movement. With trepidation, they cautiously approached the lifeless body. The man appeared to be in his 40s, with graying hair and a weathered face. His clothes were disheveled, and his expression frozen in a mix of pain and surprise. The bullet hole in his head indicated a violent end, but the weapon in his hand raised more questions than answers. Realizing that they needed to find answers, the strangers began to search the basement for any clues that could shed light on their predicament. They meticulously combed through every corner, examining every nook and cranny for any sign of a way out or a hint as to why they were there. Their search yielded a few intriguing discoveries. In a corner of the room, they found a torn piece of paper with a cryptic message written on it. The handwriting was hurried and almost illegible, but it seemed to be a clue of some sort. They carefully preserved the torn paper, hoping it would provide a crucial piece of the puzzle. The weapon in the dead man's hand drew their attention once again. It was a revolver, its cold metal surface reflecting the dim light. They examined it closely, noting the absence of any fingerprints. The lack of prints raised suspicions, suggesting that someone had deliberately wiped them clean. As they continued their investigation, the strangers realized that they had no personal belongings with them. No identification, no wallets, no phones. It was as if their lives had been completely erased, leaving them with nothing but the chains that bound them to the walls. With each clue they discovered, the strangers felt a glimmer of hope that they could unravel the mystery surrounding their presence in the basement. They knew that time was of the essence, and they needed to work together to piece together the puzzle before them. As they shared their findings and theories, a few possibilities began to emerge. Perhaps they were witnesses to a crime and had been kidnapped to ensure their silence. Or maybe they were unwitting participants in a twisted game orchestrated by a deranged individual. The possibilities were endless, and the truth seemed to elude them. Despite the fear and uncertainty that enveloped them, the strangers were determined to uncover the truth. They knew that their survival depended on it. With a renewed sense of purpose, they resolved to investigate further, hoping that each step would bring them closer to the answers they desperately sought. As they delved deeper into the investigation, little did they know that the truth they were seeking would lead them down a dark and twisted path, revealing secrets that would shake them to their core. Gathering evidence. As the two strangers found themselves chained to the walls of the mysterious basement, they knew that gathering evidence was crucial to unraveling the truth behind their predicament. With the lifeless body of a man lying in the center of the room, they understood that they needed to piece together the puzzle of what had transpired. The first step in gathering evidence was to thoroughly examine the crime scene. The two strangers cautiously approached the lifeless body, taking note of every detail. They observed the bullet wound in the man's head and the weapon clutched in his hand. It was clear that he had met a violent end, but the question remained, who was responsible? The strangers carefully inspected the surroundings, searching for any clues that might shed light on their situation. They examined the walls, the floor, and every object in the room, hoping to find something that would lead them closer to the truth. Every scratch, every stain, and every piece of debris became a potential piece of evidence. With their hands still bound, the strangers relied on their observational skills to gather physical evidence. They meticulously combed through the room, looking for anything that might provide a clue. They collected fibers, hair strands, and fingerprints, carefully preserving them for later analysis. They also paid close attention to the weapon in the deceased man's hand. They inspected it for fingerprints, hoping to find a match that could identify the killer. They took photographs of the weapon from different angles, ensuring that no detail went unnoticed. To gather a comprehensive understanding of the crime scene, the strangers documented the entire basement. They took photographs and made detailed sketches of the room, capturing its layout and any notable features. They noted the position of the chains that bound them, the distance between the walls, and the overall dimensions of the space. Additionally, they recorded the lighting conditions, the temperature, and any other environmental factors that could potentially be relevant to their investigation. They understood that even the smallest detail could hold significance in uncovering the truth. Realizing that they were the only witnesses to the events that had taken place, the strangers decided to interview each other. They asked questions about their backgrounds, their recent memories, and any potential connections they might have to the deceased man. Through their conversation, they discovered that both of them had experienced memory loss and had no recollection of how they ended up in the basement. This revelation only deepened the mystery surrounding their situation. However, they remained determined to gather as much information as possible to aid in their investigation. In their search for evidence, the strangers turned their attention to their personal belongings. They carefully examined their pockets, bags, and clothing, hoping to find any items that might provide clues about their identities or the events leading up to their captivity. They discovered identification cards, cell phones, and other personal effects. They meticulously inspected each item, looking for any signs of tampering or unusual activity. They also checked their phones for any recent calls, messages, or photographs that could shed light on their situation. With limited resources at their disposal, the strangers knew they had to make the most of what they had. They pooled their knowledge and skills, working together to analyze the evidence they had gathered. They discussed their findings, shared theories, and brainstormed possible scenarios that could explain their current predicament. They understood that time was of the essence, and they needed to act swiftly to uncover the truth. With each piece of evidence they gathered, they inched closer to understanding the events that had led them to the basement and the identity of the person responsible for their captivity. As they continued to gather evidence, the strangers remained hopeful that their efforts would eventually lead them to the answers they sought. They knew that the truth was hidden within the walls of the basement, waiting to be uncovered. With determination and perseverance, they were determined to gather enough evidence to piece together the puzzle and ultimately find a way to escape their chains. Interviewing witnesses. As the two strangers in the basement try to make sense of their situation, they realize that they need to gather as much information as possible to unravel the truth behind their predicament. With the corpse of a man in the center of the room, they understand that the deceased might hold some answers. However, since they have no memory of how they ended up in the basement, they must rely on interviewing each other as witnesses to piece together the events leading up to their current situation. The first step in their quest for answers is to share their recollections of the events leading up to their awakening in the basement. They take turns recounting their last memories before finding themselves in this strange and confined space. Each detail, no matter how insignificant it may seem, could potentially hold a clue to their predicament. One of the strangers, a woman named Sarah, recalls being at a party the night before. She remembers mingling with friends, laughing, and having a good time. However, her memory becomes hazy after that point, and she cannot recall anything specific that might explain how she ended up in the basement. The other stranger, a man named David, also struggles to remember the events leading up to their current situation. He vaguely remembers leaving work late and heading home. Beyond that, his memory is a blur, and he cannot recall anything that might shed light on their circumstances. Realizing that the corpse in the room might hold crucial information, Sarah and David carefully approach the deceased man. They examine the body, taking note of any visible injuries or signs of struggle. The bullet hole in the man's head suggests foul play, but without any other evidence, it is difficult to determine who might be responsible. They search the man's pockets and find a wallet containing identification. The man's name is John Anderson, but neither Sarah nor David recognizes him. They also discover a note tucked inside the wallet, which reads, "The truth will set you free." The cryptic message only deepens the mystery surrounding their situation. With limited information from the crime scene, Sarah and David turn to each other for answers. They take turns asking questions, hoping to uncover any shared experiences or connections that might shed light on their predicament. Sarah asks David if he recognizes John Anderson or has any knowledge of why they might be in the basement. David, however, is just as clueless as Sarah. He has never heard of John Anderson before and cannot recall any reason why they would be connected to him. David then asks Sarah if she has any enemies or if there is anyone who might want to harm her. Sarah thinks for a moment, but cannot think of anyone who would have a motive to put her in such a situation. They both realize that their lack of memory and information makes it difficult to determine the motive behind their captivity. As Sarah and David continue their conversation, they begin to explore various scenarios that might explain their current predicament. They consider the possibility of a kidnapping or a case of mistaken identity. They also entertain the idea that they might have stumbled upon something dangerous or illegal, leading someone to trap them in the basement. They discuss their professions, personal lives, and any recent events that might have triggered their current situation. However, no clear connections or explanations emerge from their conversation. Frustration and confusion start to set in as they realize that they are no closer to understanding the truth. Feeling trapped and desperate for answers, Sarah and David decide to explore the possibility of seeking help from outside sources. They consider the option of shouting for help or trying to attract attention by making noise. However, they quickly realize that their voices might not carry far enough to reach anyone who could assist them. They also consider the possibility of using the weapon found in John Anderson's hand to break free from their chains. However, without knowing the full extent of their situation, they fear that such an action might put them in even greater danger. With limited options available to them, Sarah and David understand that they must rely on their own wits and resourcefulness to uncover the truth and find a way to escape their confinement. The answers they seek may lie within the depths of their own memories, waiting to be unlocked. Reconstructing the events. As the two strangers found themselves chained to the walls of the mysterious basement, their first priority was to reconstruct the events that led them to this bewildering situation. With the lifeless body of a man lying in the center of the room, a bullet wound in his head, and a weapon clutched in his hand, the urgency to unravel the truth intensified. The strangers cautiously approached the lifeless body, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and curiosity. They meticulously examined the surroundings, taking note of every detail that could potentially shed light on the events that transpired. The position of the body, the bloodstains on the floor, and the weapon in the man's hand all held crucial clues. With a sense of urgency, the strangers began to analyze the physical evidence scattered around the basement. They carefully collected any items that seemed relevant, such as shell casings, fingerprints, and blood samples. Each piece of evidence was meticulously documented, as they knew that even the smallest detail could be the key to unlocking the truth. As they gathered more evidence, the strangers started to piece together the puzzle of what had occurred in the basement. They meticulously examined each clue, trying to connect the dots and create a coherent timeline of events. They retraced their steps, analyzing the sequence of actions that might have led to the tragic outcome they found themselves in. With each new piece of evidence, the strangers began to unravel the sequence of events that had taken place in the basement. They reconstructed the moments leading up to their awakening, trying to understand how they had become entangled in this mysterious situation. They analyzed the positioning of the body, the trajectory of the bullet, and the presence of any other potential witnesses. As they reconstructed the events, the strangers considered different scenarios that could have led to the man's death and their own captivity. They explored the possibility of foul play, questioning whether the man had been murdered or if it was a tragic accident. They also contemplated the idea that they themselves might be involved in the events, albeit unknowingly. In their quest for answers, the strangers delved into their own personal memories, hoping to find any connections to the events in the basement. They searched for any recollections that might shed light on their presence and the circumstances that led them to this grim situation. Fragments of memories began to surface, hinting at a shared past that they were yet to fully comprehend. As the strangers shared their findings and theories, they realized the importance of collaboration in reconstructing the events. They bounced ideas off each other, challenging assumptions and exploring alternative explanations. Through their combined efforts, they began to form a clearer picture of what had transpired, inching closer to the truth. With the puzzle pieces gradually falling into place, the strangers turned their attention to uncovering the motive behind the events in the basement. They analyzed the relationships between the individuals involved, searching for any underlying tensions or conflicts that could have led to such a tragic outcome. The motive, they knew, held the key to understanding the full story. As they neared the truth, the strangers focused on reconstructing the final moments leading up to the man's death. They meticulously examined the position of the body, the trajectory of the bullet, and the presence of any other potential evidence. With each detail they uncovered, the events became clearer, and the truth began to emerge from the shadows. Finally, as the strangers pieced together the events, they were faced with the unsettling truth. The basement had been the setting for a tragic crime, and they had unwittingly become entangled in its web. The motive, the sequence of events, and their own involvement slowly became clear, leaving them with a mix of relief and apprehension. As the strangers reconstructed the events, they realized that their journey to freedom was not just about escaping the physical chains that bound them, but also about breaking free from the chains of their past and the secrets that had brought them to this basement. With the truth now within their grasp, they were one step closer to finding the answers they desperately sought.